Terence Crawford, the pound for pound king, crashed out on Twitter. He woke up and chose violence against the WBC, Manny Pacquiao, Oscar De La Hoya, the boxing world, and anybody else that he deemed necessary. Let's start with the WBC stuff. There's a tweet. We'll put up some tweets during the video, but let's make things very clear. I never agreed to anything with the WBC on anything, nor did my team. So stop the cap with the narrative. I've always been a man of my word, and that is the more GPG version of his viral rant he had on Instagram, where he talked about I can't remember if he said I should slap the shit out of Mauricio or if he should slap the shit out of himself, but he believes Mauricio should have the shit slapped out of him by somebody for how he's gone about trying to get $300,000 in sanctioning fees. And before we get to everything, look, Terrence's criticism of the WBC is very well warranted. Okay, the WBC, even though it was corrupt back when Jose Sulaiman would do corrupt things with Don King during his tenure, which was even depicted in The Great White Hype, which you were in, but another story for another day. Samuel Jackson being Don King, Mauricio or Jose Sulaiman being Cheech in that movie. That's who they were referencing. But despite all the corruption they've always had, when Mauricio inherited his father's company, he had a position to go the right path and make the WBC stand head and shoulders above the rest as clearly the most prestigious belt. It was the most prestigious belt when he inherited it. And instead, through short term gain, short sightedness, greed, and all that, he has put himself in a position now where he is losing deservedly in the court of public opinion against Crawford and more importantly TKO, and we'll get to that later on. And just to back up, just to not hold any water for the WBC, there's a picture I'll put up here. I remember in 2021 there was a time I had a WBC calendar, and on the calendar it had Ryan Garcia with a WBC interim title, Devin Haney with the WBC title, and Teofimo Lopez with the WBC franchise title. And I used to make the joke, what the WBC will do is get 3% of Teofimo Lopez, 3% of Devin Haney, and 3% of Ryan Garcia. We will have three WBC champions in the same weight class at the same time, and which is absurd. And when I was coming up, all the writers would call them trinkets, right? But by Oscar always wearing the WBC, Floyd, Tyson, on and on. The WBC was the romantic title for me that, hey, if I ever became a champion, that's the one I'd want to fight for. But I'm sitting at the press conference yesterday. I'm here in Texas covering Pitbull Roach, which is a WBC interim super lightweight title. And in a couple of weeks, Subriel Matias, who had Osterine in his system, is defending the full title so that Mauricio could get 3% of two belts in the same division. And if that isn't egregious enough, because we do know Teofimo Lopez is the super lightweight champion of the world, right? And yet they're trying to convince me this interim title fight is legitimately for the super lightweight champ. I don't know what world they're referencing. Not this one where Teofimo Lopez is the champion. If that wasn't egregious enough, on the undercard is Shane Mosley Jr., who I love Shane Jr., but he's never really been a top 10 in any given weight class. Coming off a career best win, beating Daniel Jacobs. Shout out to him. But he's fighting Jesus Ramos, who's accomplished nothing at middleweight. And they got it for a WBC interim world title. And that's when I went, God damn it, they really are trinkets. He really has turned it into this. So Crawford's right, but it's coming at a time where he's holding water for TKO and in what definitely looks like a coordinated attack to take out the head, and the rest will follow. Nick Khan went after them in a PR fluff dressed as an interview with Max Kellerman going after the WBC. Yesterday in Congress, the House of Representatives, one of the talking points TKO used was going after the WBC stripping Crawford. Mauricio played right into their hands. And now Crawford, coincidentally, at the same time all this is happening, takes out his rant on the WBC. So I question part of the motive with it. But that being said, he's 100% right at the same time. Go on.
So if we dial it back to what the WBC is doing, right? They, or I should say, Mauricio, as you correctly assessed, did inherit what was far and away the most sought after, hailed title. the green belt, the green and gold, the WBC. That's what you all wanted. That's what you saw Ali with. That's what the kids aspire to. And yes, you want to be undisputed because that sounds amazing and it means something, and it does. But something about that one belt that seemed like all your heroes had is the one that you want. Now, what the WBC, I believe, was trying to accomplish with these other titles in the same weight division was to try to minimize the other sanctioning bodies, to hope that he could create an environment where the interim title, the silver title, the Cinco de Mayo title, the whatever title he was coming up with was going to be more sought after because it was under the WBC umbrella than the IBF, the WBO, the WBA, whatever other titles you could win in that division. He was hoping he could, in a way, minimize the number of titles by making all the titles a version of the WBC. If Mauricio Sulaiman and the WBC had the opportunity to do what TKO is doing and be the only title out there, and everybody had to compete for the WBC title in a heartbeat, they would do it. Don't let him fool you into thinking that he's a promoter of sanctioning bodies or the existing system where all sanctioning bodies have a level and even amount of regard. No, that's what Terence Crawford's beef was partially, was that you don't just want your sanctioning fees, you want more than everyone else. I gave everybody else something. I was going to give you that same something, and you said, no, I want this much more because we're better than them. Now, whether or not you or I, whether or not you or I want this belt or that one, the fact that they have now been called out for expecting more than everyone else lets you know that they do in fact think that the WBC title is not only better, but more deserving, and that they wield more power than anyone else, and they're going to make the fighter pay for that privilege. They're going to make the fighter pay for what they regard and what a lot of fighters themselves regard as the more important title. When the Ring Magazine title comes into play, which Terence Crawford again rightly mentions is free, it's the same positioning game. What the Ring Magazine has on their side is the lineage of it, the same kind of history that people regard. They don't have the leverage. They can't force you really into mandatories, but they're also not charging you 3%. And because the Ring Magazine now belongs to Ring, which belongs to His Excellency, they're not really in it for the money. So they're not squeezing pockets. And they want the Ring belt to be the only belt that people really care about. And to your point, that's what Terence Crawford is really making a case for. And who also benefits is TKO, because they want to have the TKO or whatever the Zuffa belt's going to be called to have their own belt, and for people to just want that belt in their system. So while Terence will be doing the bidding for Ring in this case, which makes a case. It's not like Ring's come out of nowhere. It doesn't have the history, doesn't have the desire for people to want it, but they don't right now have that position that the WBC has had for so long as being sought after and having real power as a sanctioning body to position in rank fighters and fighters to fight based on what those rankings are to get these titles. That's the difference. Terence Crawford, by essentially throwing the belt in the trash and saying, I'm not going to pay you at all. And this is something that I have to quote Eddie Hearn on, which I think he makes a case. Even he made a better case, honestly, for the WBC than Oscar De La Hoya did. You know, when I heard Oscar's mini rant, I really wasn't swayed by that. It just sounded like he was also doing WBC bidding because they've done so much for him.
Because Ryan Garcia just got a #1 ranking to fight for their title coming off a loss to Rolly Romero.
And Conor Benn, for the motivation of Eddie Hearn, just got a #1 ranking that now he'll fight Ryan Garcia and or the winner of Barrios Garcia. And Eddie, but rightly said that it is true that you can't be undisputed without that green belt. You can't have your tour and your hometown on your float and have all those belts hanging unless you fight for the WBC. The fighting for the WBC had a hand in getting you to where you are, and paying those sanctioning fees are a part of that's part of the deal. I'm not here to make a case as to whether or not the deal that the WBC or any other sanctioning body has with the fighter is legit. Or when I say legit, is a deal I'd want to be in with them, or if they should charge more or less, or what they do for the fighter or don't. But it is the deal going in. You know the deal going in. So if you parade the belt around, you classify yourself as an undisputed champion, you promote your fight as the undisputed championship, you hand the belt to me during the fight, I raise it in the pictures, and
It's
then
part of
once
his
I've
brand.
used it all up, yeah, I'm getting, as what the kids like to say, with clout. You're getting clout earned, but it's still clout. That's what you're getting by having the belt. And you've used it all up now. Like everybody's seen it. You've done it. You did the fight. You got the money. You did the parade. You held up the belt. You got the trophy case. And now you're like, to Eddie's analogy, you finished your lobster and caviar, and now you say you don't want to pay. It's like saying, well, here, you can take the fucking plate, but there's no more caviar or lobster on it.
Yeah, and what having a belt does is get guys paid that normally wouldn't get paid, who are not at the stage that Terence Crawford is at now or Canelo's at now, where they don't need the belt to be a star and to get paid. But once upon a time, he did, and he wasn't singing this tune when that was the case. Oshaki Foster, who I'm covering this weekend, right? Oshaki wouldn't be sniffing $500,000 paydays or whatever it is he's making without a WBC belt. No one, nowhere even close to that. And some of that money in the pot, as corrupt as the WBC's been, does go to guys like Pritchard Colon and other fighters who have, been disabled or have trauma. Israel Matt Vasquez, rest in peace, who died last year. They took care of his medical expenses towards the end. So Mauricio may do a million things I disagree with, but on a personal level, he is can be a nice guy and has done sometimes some of that money you're paying it pays for those extravagant conventions where they fly out legends who may not be as well off as they were when they were fighting, and they get a free weekend, the lobster and caviar that Eddie is referencing, and all of that. And with the ring, I mentioned Tio is the super lightweight champion. The ring, there was raised eyebrows when De La Hoya owned them. A promoter owning the magazine is a conflict of interest. Now it's on a whole different level with Turki Al Sheikh owning it. But to be fair, there has yet to be an egregious ring champion really in their lineage. Now, we could talk about Rolly Romero isn't even in the top 10, and fighters who've really done nothing at a high level like Raul Curiel, Alexis Rocha. They're ranked, I think, sixth and seventh, and Rolly's not even in the top 10. And he is a world champion, even though I understand their whole point is these belts don't mean anything anymore. It's about the ring. But that feels like a conflict of interest because Romero is a PBC fighter who plans on probably fighting his next fight in the United States as a non-Riyadh season event, maybe against Pacquiao, maybe against somebody else. So you're already seeing it rear its ugly head a little bit. But to give the ring their credit, their history holds up as the lineage of crowning the rightful champion in each division. Um, and give me 1 minute. Um, okay. But as a larger point about Crawford, and I said this after we gave him all the praise in the world when he defeated Canelo Alvarez, I picked against him. It was the only time I've ever picked against Terence Crawford. Might be the only time in his career I pick against him. And I've said things like he might be the greatest counterpuncher in the history of the sport. In beating Canelo, his accomplishments elevate him to a Mount Rushmore argument, whether you think he should be that quite that high or not. He is now on, to use a video game term, the S tier. He's above the A tier. He's now on the highest of the high. But I tried to say in that one problem I had with Crawford, and I understand, and we've had lengthy discussions about this in sports and in our culture as well. I understand that picking at the doubters is what ultimately spurns you on. It motivates you. It brings you on. But at some point, all you're doing is spreading negativity into the ether. And this speaks to my point. He got on a victory lap tour. Terence Crawford is playing the victim a little bit. He's saying, "Oh, you guys all thought I was going to lose to Canelo. I still don't get my credit. You guys still say I can't sell and all that." Well, Terence, how much money did they make last year in Los Angeles when they spent tens of millions of dollars to promote the Madrimov fight? It was reported by people like Kevin Iole and others, who's getting in the Hall of Fame now, that they lost 10, maybe $20 million on that event. So you're that there's an argument to be had there about how well you sell versus how much you're getting paid. He made like 5.5 million for the Khan fight. I doubt Top Rank turned a profit on that. And what I'm getting at is you've got your balls licked the last couple months, deservedly so, right? And you went on this victory tour, and everyone's crowning you everything you deserve from us to everybody else, and you're still complaining. You're still thriving off that negativity and putting it in ether. And I understand that's what drives athletes to be what they are, but I posed a deeper question about, as things continue to slip in the bigger picture of $38 trillion in debt. And I'm not putting that on Terence Crawford, but we're supposed to believe these winners, they're always in the right. They're infallible. I had a tweet a day or two ago talking about the definition parasocial, which Cambridge Dictionary has regarded as the word of the year. And parasocial is, you see it in our comments, these fans who identify and love the fighters so much that they can do no wrong. They're essentially false idols for them to worship, right? And they're Crawford playing the victim. It's like you've been celebrated by everybody. Everybody's given you enormous credit when the Errol Spence fight couldn't happen. You were painted, rightfully so, as the sympathetic figure. That because you're with a promoter, because you didn't choose to sign with Al Heyman, you're getting frozen out of the top fights in the welterweight division. The boxing media and the intelligentsia has long ranked you as number one pound for pound, or if not close to it. Everyone's been celebrated, and he's still not happy. And I think that bears a point to make.
All right. Well, he being the guy who is going to be you know how when you have and this is a very American angle, but the Supreme Court will hear a case, right? But what comes before the Supreme Court is not random. They're not pulling it out of their hat like bingo balls. You put a case in the lower courts first to begin the process of building that case because you want it to go to the Supreme Court. And what you do is you pick the best possible case for you to win. On this metric, you believe you can present this case to the Supreme Court. Might not be where the argument starts, but that's where you always intend it to go. And on the back of that case and the strength of that case is what you believe you can argue in front of the Supreme Court. And what Terence Crawford is right now is their best case. And the reason is because he really is, for everything that you just said, he really is the man of the moment. He
Yes,
is
he
a
earned
fan
that.
favorite. He may, whatever his ticket sales may have been, or
He's the
who
best
made
fighter in the
money or who
world.
didn't. Right now, Terence Crawford is the guy. He did what seemingly was impossible. He made it look fairly easy. He is undisputed, and he is the first guy really to in this. And I know that other people have denied the sanctioning bodies their fees, and other people have protested, but because of the climate right now, I would say that this is the biggest case somebody has made and the most vitriolic they've been in refuting to pay these sanctioning fees. Terence Crawford's that guy. He's that case. And the reason I think that the WBC is so right for the crosshairs is because not only of what you said earlier in the show, but because of many other elements that are questionable. Because of their ranking system, because of who, like Canelo, wasn't forced to face their mandatories, who could be in recess, who's been waiting like Dillian White for 3 years. All these little things that are absolutely political that these conventions that just happened in Thailand, people line up. And I don't know how people get convinced to be put in what place, but it sure seems to work out for the people with the money and the relationships to get their fighters in position to get the shots that they want when they want them. And these conventions all are exactly that. They convene in one spot to work out the politics of boxing, where it really, why is that necessary? It should all be very transparent and ongoing. What's
Yes.
happening at these conventions that changes what we've all seen happen in the ring? Nothing. It's what's happening in the back room. It's what's happening in the boardrooms that you don't see. It's what's happening at the restaurant and the envelopes and the conversations and the calls about what could happen next and who's going to pay these sanctioning fees and how big these shows going to get and who's going to get so much money that the sanctioning fees will be significantly better if you give this guy a shot over that guy. That's what's happening. And if you shine a spotlight on that, you're going to see a lot of roaches, rats, corruption, and a lot of underbelly dealings that need being exposed. So that is really the case that even with his rant and his obscenity laden takedown of the WBC is already still absent from his argument. He really didn't lay that all out, but that's the real thing that they don't want you looking under the hood for. And so now, because there's a true challenge to this sanctioning body structure, and the WBC being the most recognizable of them and clearly expecting more than everybody else for the privilege, they are going to have to be the first to clean up. They're going to, if they're going to win this or at least make a case that this sanctioning body structure is better than and should be engaged in as an alternative to what TKO is bringing, then you're going to have to show us why. And there's a lot to look at as to why not right now. So if the WBC is smart, and Sulaiman is, I would look more inside the house and let Terence Crawford do what he wants to do outside the house. You might say it's a bad look for Terence, but it's a bad look for the WBC too, because they can't really make the case that they want to make or should be able to make, because they also don't want you looking under the hood. They don't want you looking too closely. They don't want you asking too many questions or having to answer too many details. So they try to make asking a fighter that to apologize, you better have your ducks in a row in your case and your argument made where you have really got a long line of disrespect or something to point to where a fighter should apologize for not paying his sanction fees and letting you strip him. No, I think maybe you owe an apology. Maybe everybody owes a little bit of an apology for engaging in this system and knowing it's corrupt and knowing what it really does to boxing with the politics. And give yourself now, before TKO comes in, this legislation is going to pass, it's going to happen. Ain't nobody stopping it. So get over that pipe dream. And before they have their first event, if you want to compete and convince fighters that this system is better than that one, you better clean this system up and be able to point to something that's better than what they're offering. And right now, I don't think any sanctioning body can do that, least of all the WBC.
Just to flesh out some of my points about Crawford is, like you mentioned, the WBC, one of their most egregious errors that Crawford pointed out is how they never mandated Canelo to fight David Benavidez. And Canelo kind of got his karma in the end by losing to Crawford instead of Benavidez. But Crawford never had his feet held to the fire to defend his WBC and undisputed titles against Jaron Ennis the way Canelo was against David Benavidez. And that's what I mean by he's always the sympathetic figure. He's always the guy that the boxing establishment, puts up, and for good reason a lot of times. But in this case, again, he's got right message at an interesting time, because he's again carrying water for TKO's talking points at the same time they're making them. And I spoke to, look, I'm here in Texas covering Pitbull Roach. What's hot off right after this weekend concludes is the USA National Tournament, right? And I speak to some of these top amateurs, a number of them, not just one or two. And I spoke to one of their fathers, who I respect a great deal, a very smart man who has a very talented son fighting in this tournament. And he agreed with much of what Bud said, but in support of TKO in Turkey at the end, he expressed, in his words, disappointment, because he has a son one day that he hopes can make the kind of money and have the kind of opportunities that Terence Crawford had. And if TKO can pass this bill where they may be able to implement the same kind of business practices that they've implemented in the UFC that has them in multiple antitrust lawsuits. And by the way, Lawrence Epstein, their chief operating officer, wouldn't commit to that kind of transparent information at yesterday's hearings in Washington, D.C., then he feels like Bud is potentially feeding the next generation of fighters into a system that will not allow them the same kind of opportunities that he had.
Well, he's not feeding them into a system. He is potentially showcasing or highlighting, or spotlighting is a better word, a system that is coming into play to challenge the existing system. The existing system will continue to exist. So if the existing system's argument is that we need to be the only system because what's going to happen over here is so bad that it shouldn't exist, then you've got to fairly weak argument. That's maybe the worst argument you can make, that we need to be the only ones in the game because what they're bringing in the game is so bad. Well, if what they're bringing in the game is so bad and your game still exists, then no one should pick their game over your game because your game is so much better, not because it's the only game in town. It should be. I don't see any problem with competition. In fact, this TKO and new version of a system by which fighters can fight inside should be the motivation for the sanctioning bodies to clean their act up and give a good challenging argument to whatever comes out on this side. If they're the only game in town, then why? What stops them from being corrupt? This system's not perfect, far from it. So what you're afraid of creating is something that can hold a mirror up to what you already are doing. If you have such a better system than is coming into play, then that will fail under the weight of how good you are, not stop it from existing so nobody can have an alternative to what you're currently doing. That is a telltale. The fact that you're not saying what's so great about us, but just projecting fear about what's so terrible about them. It may be terrible or it may be great, but really your job is to make sure that what you're offering is great and make them measure up to it. I don't see that motivation. I don't see the system over here, while it has time right now, clearing itself out of corruption, cleansing itself of its past wrongs, and presenting something that we can all be proud of, get behind, and say, hey, this is the only system we want to fight in because it's so good. How about that? How about just presenting a clean glass next to a dirty glass instead of just pointing over there and being like, that glass is so dirty that you can drink this mud water?
I'm making though is you want to advocate for TKO and you want to bring up that their belt is free. This $188,000 belt is free. And it's like, well, yeah, the ring belt doesn't have to worry about an actual profit margin like the WBC. Your belt is funded by the oil money of a public investment fund of the Saudi government. It's not an apples to apples comparison. Just like he wants to hold water for TKO because they finally got him the payday he felt he always deserved, but outside of the Spence fight was never actually worth. That's why they lost 10 to 20 million dollars on his fight with Madrimov last year. Have some accountability for the people you may be ushering in because you got what you wanted out of it. It's like a pattern here where it's always everybody else and not him. Like, okay, he mentioned the Manny Pacquiao fight. He is correct. Top Rank and Freddie Roach kept Manny Pacquiao away from him. I remember Lee Samuels, their late PR guy, was telling me Freddie saw the Postal fight and he said no, his legs are basically too good. The movement and everything will give Pacquiao too many problems. So yeah, you're correct. Like he is about every time he has a gripe, whether it's against PBC, whether against WBC, whether it's against not getting the Pacquiao fight. Terence, to give him his credit, always has a good point, right? But then he never acknowledges the other side. He hated doing interviews. I don't have sour grapes. I'm actually a reporter who's had a lot of great moments with Terence Crawford caught on camera in interviews. And I'm grateful for those moments. But because he chose to always, say fuck the media and treat it as an adversary and all of that. And don't forget, he tried to sue Top Rank for racism, right? Top Rank, who I mentioned earlier, did probably lose money on some of his fights. How did they make? They probably paid. I think they paid him $4 million for Kell Brook. That happened in COVID when there was no tickets to be sold. I mean, I know that's a part of their ESPN budget, but he didn't turn them a profit. ESPN gave them a budget to do it. He didn't earn them a profit at the box office. In regards to a Pacquiao fight, in him not wanting to do media, look, you have almost a 10-year age advantage and a stylistic matchup nightmare for Pacquiao. If you're gonna want the old man to do the job and put you over, you gotta part of the job of being a star champion fighter is putting in the road work, eating the right things, getting your sparring in 3 times a week against the right sparring partner, and handling your job as a public figure with the media to build your profile so that you can get that money that you didn't really get, sans Spence, until Saudi was willing to lose money on you. And then to Crawford's credit, Canelo and him did a huge number at Allegiant Stadium. They did Netflix to where that they drew a lot of money. He earned his money to a large extent with that. But you didn't want to do that for Pacquiao, so you didn't get the opportunity. And part of that was on you, Terence. It wasn't just you don't want to fight Jaron Ennis, right? Why? because he doesn't really have a public profile. It's a very difficult fight against a guy with about a 10-year youth advantage. You're now Manny Pacquiao who didn't want to fight you back then. That's what I mean. And one minor point I'm going to insert here in the middle of this discussion between me and Raheem is I know Crawford fans will go, Terence was undisputed 140-pound champion, Ring Magazine champion when he beat Ricky Burns at lightweight. All Boots has done is unify two belts at welterweight. It's not an apples to apples comparison. I know, but largely a lot of the point still stands. Continue. Also, part of why maybe I was a little salty knowing Crawford would beat Canelo was there's so many great fighters in the history of this sport. From forget the S tier, the Sugar Ray Leonard, Four Kings, Muhammad Ali. I'm talking James Lights Out Tony. I'm talking Mike the Body Snatcher McCallum. I'm talking Sugar Shane Mosley, who I talked to yesterday, and who Jack Mosley, who saw Sugar Ray Robinson and all of them, said Crawford could fight with any of those guys. And Shane was trying to be a hater like me a little bit. He's like, I don't know if he could have went up against me, Oscar, Vernon, and Tito. And Jack Mosley intercedes and go, yes, he could, son. He could switch hit. He's got the will to win. He could have fought in any era, right? But part of what I didn't like is I now just got to immediately elevate him because he beats Canelo over all those killers, all the Norrises, all the McCallums, all the Tonys, and all. And I don't know if he really would have beaten them head to head. So what he says is now is I am legend. He's Will Smith now. And he goes, I am legend. And basically says the only one who could have fucked with me was Floyd. And that was him walking it back a little bit after he really said I'd kick Floyd's ass too. He's supposed to think that way. I understand that. But let me tell you a story of when I was at Jay Prince's mansion having a dinner I will always treasure. You know what? I think I still have a picture of it that I should share in this video where I'm having dinner with Shakur and Coach K. Karoma's whipping up some delicious food at Jay Prince's mansion. And I'm sitting there with Bud Crawford and Shakur. And guess who comes on the screen? Raheem. A prime Oscar De La Hoya fighting Felix Tito Trinidad, right? And Bud goes on me. Oscar was good. Woo. Oscar, like he was watching it as it's on the screen during dinner, and he's talking about how and people will say, oh, well, this was off the record. We never clarified whether it was off the record or on the record anyways, and people deserve to hear this hotness. So he and I go to Bud and I go, right, but you would have beat him though, right? Like, because Bud was saying, oh, he beat everybody today. And he was referencing Spence and Porter and Thurman and whoever was in and around those divisions. He's like, Oscar would have smoked all of them essentially. And I go, but not you, right? And he went, shit, I don't know. Like, being the real one he is. And by the way, if push come to shove, Terrence would go, yes, I would beat him. But the point he was making was that motherfucker was so bad that in this very moment when you ask me, I'm going to afford him the respect of I don't know. It's a fight. It's a fight. We would have had to see. We would have had to run it to find out. So he's doing his victory lap. I'll say it again. He's had his balls licked for months, and the first time we hear of him is what I said after the fight. What he's known for, spreading that negativity in the ether. And I know the parasocial relationship of his fans will eat it up. They'll eat up anything he does. Same thing they'll do with any of your favorite fighters. They all have their fan bases that do this nonsense, which we're not a part of. Okay, we're trying to tell the truth here, not just dick ride. Okay, so I had to make that point as well, Raheem.
I think you made it, Sean. I think you made it.